What would you do if you came home to find your lifeline severed? A smug note taped to the wreckage, accusing you of breaking the rules on your own land. The air was thick with the sound of rushing water as I, Tom Hargrove, stood knee-deep in a muddy mess that shouldn't have existed, staring at the jagged end of my main supply pipe. It had been cleanly sliced, capped with a shoddy mess of duct tape, and marked with a laminated sign flapping in the breeze. Unauthorized water use. Hua en fa sem. The audacity of it burned in my chest, a fire of disbelief and rage. The Pine Valley HOA had no claim over my 50 acres of private land. None. But Lisa, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, had no idea who she was dealing with. I'm the one who built the water system her pristine little neighborhood depends on. She just made the gravest mistake of her life, and I was about to turn her world upside down. It all unraveled after I returned from a peaceful 4-day fishing trip at the lake. My monthly ritual to escape the chaos, reel in some bass, and let the silence mend my soul. No phone, no emails, just the ripple of water over smooth stones, the hum of the woods, and the cool weight of a trout on my line. But the moment I stepped onto my ranch and turned the faucet to fill my old dog Rusty's bowl, I knew something was wrong. No water. Nothing. Imagine standing in my boots, the sinking dread in your gut as you realize someone's tampered with your lifeline. What'd you do next? Option 1. Confront the HOA head-on, demanding answers with fire in your voice. Or Option 2. Stay calm, investigate quietly, and plan your next move with precision. Drop your choice, 1 or 2, in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're as hooked as I was, please hit that subscribe button for daily narrated stories. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to us. Let's dive into this tale of betrayal, resilience, and the quiet power of justice. The faucet coughed once, a dry, mocking rasp that echoed through the stillness of my ranch house, then fell silent. I turned the handle again, harder this time, my knuckles whitening as if sheer will could summon the water. Nothing. I moved to the hose by the barn, the rubber cool and dusty in my hands. Still nothing. The kitchen sink offered no relief either, its empty sputter a taunt in the quiet morning air. My heart began to thud, a dull rhythm of unease that grew louder with each failed attempt. I grabbed my flashlight, its weight a small comfort in my hand, and headed out to trace the pipe, my boots kicking up dust in the early dawn light. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine from the woods that border my land, a scent that usually calmed me, but now felt like a cruel contrast to the storm brewing inside. At the edge of my property, where the land dipped toward the lower pasture, I found the source of my dread. The ground was freshly torn, clumps of dirt scattered like a child's messy sandbox, the earth raw and exposed. Tire tracks crisscrossed the dirt, deep and deliberate, alongside the imprint of high-heeled boots, one heel chipped, a jagged little signature I'd recognize anywhere. My waterline lay exposed, severed clean through, the jagged ends of the PVC pipe glinting in the flashlight's beam. It was capped with a mess of duct tape, wrapped in bright orange HOA tape like a warning flag, and a flyer was staked in the ground beside it, fluttering in the breeze like a conqueror's banner. The Pine Valley HOA had declared my irrigation non-compliant, their words dripping with self-righteous cheer, as if they'd caught a thief red-handed. I stood there, the beam of my flashlight trembling in my grip, the cool air brushing against my skin as a storm of anger and disbelief brewed in my chest. My ranch had never been part of their jurisdiction, not in any legal sense, not ever. The violation felt personal, a stab at the heart of the life I'd built here, a life rooted in independence and hard-earned peace. I could almost feel the weight of the land beneath my feet, whispering its history, urging me to fight back. I stared at the flyer for what felt like an eternity, the words blurring as my mind raced back through decades of history on this land. This wasn't just a pipe, it was my pipe, drawing water from a reservoir I'd built with my own hands in 1992. I could still hear my father's gravelly voice as we worked side by side, the sun beating down on our backs, our shirts soaked with sweat, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and diesel from the backhoe. "This'll keep the land alive, Tom," he'd said, wiping his brow with a faded handkerchief, his eyes squinting against the glare. "No matter what comes, we'll have water." That reservoir wasn't just a utility. It was a lifeline, a promise to my family, to this earth, to the legacy we'd carved out against all odds. We'd built it after a brutal drought in '89 nearly wiped us out. 3 months with no rain, the crops wilting to brittle stalks, the cattle lowing in desperation as their water troughs turned to dust. I'd watch my father pace the fields at night, his silhouette stark against the moonlit sky, whispering prayers for rain that never came. I was just 22 then, barely a man, but I'd seen the fear in his eyes, the kind that comes from knowing everything you've built could crumble. That's when we decided to dig the reservoir, a backbreaking labor of love that took weeks. Weeks of blistered hands, aching backs, and late nights under the stars, planning each step. We'd celebrated when the first water flowed in, a trickle at first, then a steady stream, glinting like hope in the sunlight. My father had hugged me then, his arms strong despite his exhaustion, and I'd felt a pride so deep it anchored me to this land forever. The HOA had no claim to it, not in any deed, lease, or county record. I walked the property line, my boots crunching on the gravel, the flashlight beam slicing through the gathering dusk, its light catching the dew on the grass like tiny stars. There was no other damage, no further intrusion, just this one brazen act of sabotage. But those tire tracks, they belonged to a black BMW SUV, the kind Lisa drove with a vanity plate that screamed HOA 4EVR. And the chipped heel? I'd seen it before, on Lisa's pearl-encrusted sandals, the one she wore to every HOA meeting like she was strutting down a runway, not a suburban cul-de-sac. For a moment, I felt a pang of betrayal. Not just for the pipe, but for the years I'd lived alongside these people, keeping their lawns green, their lives comfortable, while they turned a blind eye to Lisa's tyranny. I'd always been the quiet neighbor, the one who fixed their sprinklers during storms, who waved as their kids rode bikes past my gate. And now this. The sting of it cut deeper than the pipe itself. Lisa must have thought she was untouchable, driving onto my land because she sat on the HOA board, her BMW's tires leaving deep ruts in my grass like a scar. I could almost picture her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, her lips pursed in that smug, self-satisfied way as she scribbled notes on her clipboard, her voice nasal and sharp as she barked orders to her minions. She'd probably lectured them about community standards while her engine idled, the purr of the BMW a smug counterpoint to her self-righteous tone. My blood simmered, a slow boil of rage mixed with disbelief, the heat rising in my chest like a wildfire. How dare she? How dare she assume she could waltz onto my property, sever my lifeline, and slap a fine on it like I was some petty criminal? I clenched my fists, the flashlight shaking in my grip, the beam dancing across the torn earth. And for a moment, I imagined storming over to her McMansion, pounding on her door and demanding she explain herself. My breath came in sharp bursts, the cool air doing little to calm the fire inside me. I could see her now, opening the door in her pristine blazer, her eyes narrowing as she clutched her clipboard like a shield, her voice dripping with condescension as she told me to file a formal complaint. The thought made my stomach churn, a mix of anger and frustration that threatened to boil over. But that wasn't me. I'd spent 30 years on this land, weathering storms both natural and man-made, and I'd learned that anger without a plan was a fire that burned you first. I remember a time, years ago, when a neighboring farmer had tried to divert my water during a dry spell, thinking I wouldn't notice. I'd been younger then, hot-headed, ready to confront him with fists if I had to. But my father had stopped me, his hand firm on my shoulder. "Think, Tom," he'd said, his voice steady. "You don't win by fighting. You win by being smarter." We'd traced the diversion, documented it, and taken it to the county, winning back our water without a single raised voice. That lesson had stayed with me, a guiding star in moments like this. Besides, I had something Lisa didn't, a secret I'd kept close for years, a hidden ace that would turn her power play into her undoing. I took a deep breath, the cool air filling my lungs, the scent of pine and earth grounding me, and forced myself to focus. I snapped photos of the scene, the flash of my camera illuminating the severed pipe like a crime scene, the light catching the duct tape sheen. I logged the damage in my notebook, each word a quiet promise to set this right, my handwriting steady despite the tremor in my chest. Then I headed back to my barn, the faint scent of hay and motor oil wrapping around me like a comforting blanket, the crunch of gravel under my boots a steady rhythm. As I walked, I found myself whistling, not out of joy, but because I knew something Lisa didn't. There was a valve, a breaker box, a piece of this puzzle she'd never seen coming, and I was about to play my hand. Decades ago, when Pine Valley was just a blueprint on some developer's desk, they came to me with a problem. The city wanted a fortune to extend municipal water lines, a cost that would have delayed their project by years, and the developers weren't willing to pay. I saw an opportunity, not just for profit, but to be a good neighbor, to build a bridge between my solitary life and the community growing around me. I offered a deal. I'd extend my water line to supply their 35 homes, and they'd pay a modest monthly fee while maintaining their own pump. We shook on it under the shade of an old oak tree, the developer's hands firm in mine, their smiles grateful as we signed the papers. The agreement was filed deep in county records, a dusty folder forgotten by time, its pages yellowing in some basement archive. But when the HOA cycled through new leaders, they let the lease lapse, 12 years ago, to be exact. They never bothered to build their own system, never invested in the infrastructure they so desperately needed, assuming my water would always flow like a river they could tap at will. So every drop that flowed into their sprinklers, their showers, their ornamental lotus ponds, it all came from my land, from my reservoir, from the system I'd poured my heart into. I remember the day we finished laying the main line, my father clapping me on the shoulder, his eyes crinkling with pride as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "You've done good, son," he'd said, his voice rough with emotion. "This'll keep him going for years." I'd nodded, my chest swelling with a quiet satisfaction, never imagining that one day I'd be standing here, betrayed by the very people I'd helped. I thought of the first family to move into Pine Valley, the Wilsons, a young couple with a baby girl named Emily. They knocked on my door one evening, a basket of homemade cookies in hand, thanking me for the water that let them start their new life. Emily had been a toddler then, her chubby hands reaching for Rusty as she giggled, her parents' laughter filling my porch. I'd watched her grow over the years, waving as she rode her bike past my gate, her ponytail bouncing in the sunlight. Now she was a teenager, and I wondered what she thought of this mess. Did she blame me, or did she see Lisa for what she was? Lisa probably strutted back to her HOA meeting after cutting my pipe, her heels clicking on the pavement, gloating about how she'd enforce compliance against the rogue rancher. She might have even handed out little badges to her clipboard brigade, her voice ringing with triumph as she declared victory, her minions nodding like obedient puppets. But in severing my pipe, she'd handed me the perfect opening, a green light to remind her who really held the reins, a chance to turn her arrogance into her downfall. Inside my barn, behind a stack of hay bales, sat a weathered breaker box, its paint chipped and faded from years of neglect, the metal cool to the touch. My fingers brushed against it as I opened the lid, the hinges creaking like an old man's joints, the sound echoing in the dim space. The scent of hay and old wood filled the air, a familiar comfort that steadied my racing heart. Inside were 3 switches, each labeled in my father's careful handwriting, the ink faded but legible. One for irrigation, one for pressure, and a third, hidden behind a rusted flap, marked in faded marker as main flow gate. That third switch controlled the entire HOA system, a failsafe I'd installed after the lease lapsed, knowing that one day I might need to protect what was mine. My heart pounded with a mix of anger and resolve as I stood there, the dim light of the barn casting long shadows across the floor, the silence pressing in like a living thing. What would Lisa do when she realized the full extent of her mistake? Would she come begging, her clipboard abandoned, or would she double down on her arrogance, digging her hole even deeper? I could almost hear her voice now, shrill and indignant, rallying her minions to fight the injustice of my retaliation. The thought made my jaw clench, but it also fueled my determination. I flipped the switch off with a single motion, the click echoing in the quiet barn like a gunshot, a sound that felt final, unyielding. Just like that, 34 homes, a community center, and 3 decorative fountains went bone dry. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant bark of Rusty, my old hound, who'd finally gotten his water from a bucket I'd filled from the well, his tail thumping against the barn floor. For a moment, I stood there, the weight of what I'd done settling over me like a heavy fog, the shadows of the barn seeming to grow longer, darker. Had I gone too far? With the neighbors I'd lived beside for years, families I'd waved to, children I'd watched grow up, turn against me? I thought of Mrs. Carter, who always baked me a pie at Christmas, her warm smile a constant in my solitary life. I thought of young Timmy Evans, who'd once helped me round up a stray calf, his laughter echoing across the pasture as we worked together. Would they understand? Or would they see me as the villain Lisa painted me to be? I closed my eyes, the scent of hay grounding me, and pushed the doubt aside. Then I remembered the smug sign on my pipe, the audacity of her trespass, the way she'd violated something I'd built with my own hands, and the doubt melted into a steely determination. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about protecting what was mine, what my family had sacrificed for. By dusk, the fallout began to ripple through Pine Valley, a wave of chaos I could feel even from my porch. I sat there, a mug of coffee warming my hands, the steam curling into the cool evening air, the bitter taste grounding me as I watched the neighborhood unravel. From 5 properties away, I heard Lisa's shrill voice cutting through the quiet, a piercing sound that carried over the cul-de-sac like a siren. She was ranting about the Thompsons' pool draining mid-party, the water level dropping so fast their guests had fled in a panic, leaving floaties bobbing in the shallow end. She screamed about the Carter kids flooding a bathroom with oatmeal in a desperate attempt to fix the pipes, the sticky mess clogging the drain as their parents scrambled for a plumber. Someone called a plumber, their voice frantic on the neighborhood chat. No water anywhere. What's going on? Another neighbor posted, "The fountains are dead, and my lawn's turning brown." I sipped my coffee, the bitterness matching the ache in my chest, and watched as sprinkler heads across the cul-de-sac sputtered and died, their usual rhythmic dance reduced to a pitiful wheeze, the grass beneath them already yellowing in the fading light. I didn't want this fight, not really. I'd spent 30 years keeping this system running, ensuring their lawns stayed green, their lives comfortable while I minded my own business. I'd fixed leaks in the dead of night, rain soaking through my jacket as thunder rolled overhead, my fingers numb from the cold. I'd cleared blockages during storms, wading through mud to find the source, my boots sinking into the earth as lightning flashed in the distance. I'd done it all without a word of thanks, without asking for recognition, because that's who I was, a man who kept his word, who took care of his own. And now, after all that, Lisa had the gall to cut my line and call me the criminal? I thought of my late wife, Sarah, who used to sit here with me on this very porch, her laughter filling the quiet nights as we watched the stars, her hand warm in mine. She'd always said, "Tom, you've got a heart of gold, but don't let anyone walk over it." Her words echoed in my mind now, a gentle reminder of why I couldn't let this go, a whisper of her strength urging me forward. Little did Lisa know, I had another trick up my sleeve, a hidden reservoir I hadn't even touched yet, a secret that would make her regret ever stepping foot on my land, a final card I'd kept close for a moment just like this. I set my mug down, the ceramic clinking softly against the wood, and leaned back in my chair, the creak of the old rocking chair a steady rhythm as I waited for the next act to unfold. By sunrise, Pine Valley was a ghost of its former self, a shadow of the pristine neighborhood Lisa had ruled with an iron fist. Sprinklers that once danced in perfect rhythm stood silent, their nozzles drooping like wilted flowers, the grass beneath them browning in the relentless sun. Fountains gurgled weakly, their pumps straining for water that wouldn't come. The once sparkling water, now a murky green, the surface rippling with a faint breeze. Neighbors twisted their faucets, frowning at the dry pipes, their morning routines thrown into chaos. Parents unable to fill a kettle for coffee, kids whining as they brushed their teeth with bottled water. The neighborhood chat buzzed with panic. Messages like, "No water for my morning shower," and "The kids can't brush their teeth," flooded the screen, a digital cacophony of frustration and fear. Lisa tried to play it cool, posting a message with forced optimism. "It's a temporary glitch. A technician is on the way." But her words rang hollow, a desperate attempt to maintain control as her kingdom crumbled. By noon, her own lawn was wilting, the edges curling in the heat, her prized lotus pond turning murky with algae, the delicate flowers sinking beneath the surface, their beauty choked by neglect. I watched from my porch, a pair of binoculars in hand, the scent of fresh coffee grounding me as I observed the chaos unfold like a drama I'd scripted myself. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt, not for Lisa, but for the families caught in the crossfire. The Thompsons with their 3 kids who'd always wave when I drove by, their smiles bright even on the hottest days. The Carters who'd invited me to their barbecue last summer, their laughter echoing across their backyard as we shared stories over grilled burgers. I thought of Emily Wilson, now a teenager, who'd once drawn me a picture of Rusty, her crayons capturing his floppy ears with surprising detail. Did they blame me for this? Or did they see Lisa's hand in their suffering? But then I remembered the smugness in Lisa's voice at the last HOA meeting I'd attended, years ago, when she'd fine me for my mailbox being non-compliant. I hadn't even been part of the HOA, but she'd sent the fine anyway, a power play to assert her dominance, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction as she handed me the notice. That memory steeled my resolve, the guilt fading like mist in the morning sun. This wasn't about them. It was about her, about the line she'd crossed, the legacy she'd tried to steal. Lisa stormed through the neighborhood, her navy blazer crisp despite the heat, a clipboard clutched like a shield, her blonde hair pulled tight but with a few strands escaping, sticking to her sweaty forehead. Her face was flushed, her eyes wild with a mix of fury and desperation, the mask of control she'd worn for years slipping with every step. I saw her kick a garden statue in frustration, the ceramic gnome shattering against a rock with a sharp crack, her heel catching on a slick patch of pavement from the previous day's overwatering. She nearly fell, her arms flailing, her clipboard flying from her hands and landing in a puddle, the paper soaking through as she scrambled to retrieve it. I couldn't suppress a grim smile, the sight of her unraveling a small victory in the larger war. She pounded on the Evans door, her voice sharp as she accused Mrs. Evans of unauthorized usage, even though there was no water to use. Mrs. Evans, a kind woman with graying hair, opened the door, her hands wringing a dish towel as she tried to reason with Lisa, her voice soft but trembling. "Lisa, please, we don't have any water. How could we be using it?" Lisa didn't listen, her tirade a storm of accusations, her finger jabbing toward Mrs. Evans like a dagger. Then she turned, her eyes narrowing as she pointed toward my ranch, her arms flailing like I was the villain in her personal soap opera, her voice rising to a shriek that echoed across the cul-de-sac. I watched her, this woman who'd built her identity on control, and saw the cracks beginning to form, not just in her authority, but in her composure, her humanity. She was unraveling, a puppet whose strings were snapping one by one, and part of me wondered what had driven her to this point. Was it fear of losing power, or something deeper? A need to be seen, to be respected, that she'd twisted into tyranny? I thought of my own life, the quiet pride I took in this land, the way I'd chosen solitude over control, and felt a pang of pity for her. I remember a moment, years ago, when I'd seen Lisa at the grocery store, struggling to load bags into her BMW, her hands shaking as she dropped a bag of apples, the fruit rolling across the parking lot. I'd helped her pick them up, her face softening for a moment as she thanked me, a glimpse of vulnerability beneath her armor. But that softness was gone now, buried under years of petty rules and power plays. I decided to stroll down to the gate separating my land from their cul-de-sac. Not to stir trouble, just to watch the storm I'd unleashed. What would she do when she saw me? Would she back down or come at me with all she had? The tension coiled in my gut, a snake ready to strike. As I walked down the path, the gravel crunching under my boots, the gate looming ahead like a line in the sand. Sure enough, Lisa spotted me and charged over. Her face flushed a deep crimson, her voice sharp as a whip, cutting through the morning air like a blade. "You turned off the water, didn't you? I know it was you." Her eyes blazed with fury, but there was a tremor in her voice, a hint of desperation that betrayed her bravado, a crack in the facade she'd built so carefully. She clutched her clipboard like a lifeline, her knuckles white, her nails digging into the wood. I leaned against the gate, the cool metal grounding me, the rough texture a reminder of the boundaries she'd crossed, and kept my tone even, my voice steady as the oak trees lining my property. "I've been minding my own business, Lisa. Maybe your board disconnected the wrong pipe when they cut mine." Her eyes widened, a flicker of doubt crossing her face, her lips parting as if to speak, but finding no words. She hadn't considered that her power play might have backfired so spectacularly, that her actions might have consequences she couldn't control. For a moment, she stood there, her clipboard trembling in her hands, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, and I could almost hear the gears grinding in her mind, searching for a way out. But she doubled down, her voice rising to a near scream, the sound grating against the quiet morning. "You were stealing from the HOA system. That pipe was illegal. I fixed it." I tilted my head, the faintest smirk tugging at my lips, a quiet defiance in my gaze. "You mean the pipe I installed in '92, before your HOA even existed? The one drawing from a reservoir I built? Just making sure we're on the same page." She faltered, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, her eyes darting as if searching for an escape. In that moment, I saw the cracks in her armor. Not just a tyrant, but a woman clinging to control because she feared losing it. A woman who'd built her life on rules because they gave her a sense of safety in a world she couldn't predict. I thought of Sarah again, her gentle voice in my mind. "Some people fight because they're scared, Tom. Doesn't make it right, but it makes them human." For a split second, I almost pitted Lisa, the weight of her own choices pressing down on her like a storm cloud. Almost. But then I remembered the smug sign, the severed pipe, the way she'd violated something sacred, and the pity evaporated like morning dew, replaced by a resolve as hard as the gravel beneath my feet. I wondered what she'd do next. Would she try to rally her minions, or would she retreat to lick her wounds? The tension hung between us like a taut wire, crackling with unspoken challenges, and I knew this was only the beginning of her unraveling. She tried to recover, her voice sharp but unsteady, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Then why does the HOA lose water when your valve is off?" I leaned closer, my voice steady as the oak trees lining my property, each word measured, deliberate. "Because you never built your own system. You've been using mine for years. Your HOA was supposed to renew the lease with me. They didn't. Technically, you're all trespassing on my water." Her face froze, the gears in her mind grinding to a halt, her eyes widening as the truth hit her like a freight train. "You're bluffing," she spat, but her voice lacked conviction, the word a desperate plea rather than a challenge. "Nope. County records will back me up. You should check them sometime, right next to the zoning laws that say your authority stops at that fancy hedge over there." The silence that followed was sweeter than any victory speech, a heavy, palpable thing that seemed to press down on her, her shoulders slumping slightly under its weight. I could see her certainty crumbling, her eyes darting as if searching for an escape, her fingers tightening around her clipboard until the wood creaked. I wondered what she'd do now. Would she try to fight back, or would she crumble under the weight of her own mistakes? The tension coiled tighter, a storm brewing in the space between us, and I knew this moment would define the rest of our battle. I turned back toward my ranch, the gate creaking behind me as I walked away, leaving her standing there, her clipboard a useless shield against the truth, her silhouette stark against the rising sun. As I walked, I thought of my father again, his lessons echoing in my mind, a steady anchor in the chaos. "Patience, Tom," he'd always said. "Let the truth do the talking." I'd let the truth speak now, and I'd wait to see how Lisa responded, whether she'd bow to it or fight it with every ounce of her being. By midday, the neighborhood chat had erupted into chaos, a digital storm of panic and anger that I could feel even from my porch. A friend, Mark, who'd always nodded politely when I passed his driveway, sent me screenshots of the drama, his messages a mix of amusement and disbelief. Mark had never liked Lisa. She'd once fined him for growing sunflowers, claiming they were too tall for the aesthetic, even though his kids had planted them with such joy, their small hands patting the soil with care. Now, he was gleefully sharing Lisa's meltdown as she tried to regain control, her messages a desperate attempt to hold her crumbling empire together. "It's a minor setback," she posted, her words hollow against the growing panic, her tone forced, brittle. "We'll have this resolved by evening." But the board was confused, their replies a mix of questions and frustration, their usual deference to Lisa replaced by doubt. Residents were furious, their messages a litany of complaints. "My garden's dying. We can't even flush the toilets." And kids were whining about the dry splash pad at the community center, their voices echoing through open windows. Some neighbors called plumbers, their voices frantic on the phone, the sound of their desperation carrying across the cul-de-sac. One even rented a water truck to fill their tank, a desperate bid to save their wilting garden, the truck's engine rumbling as it pulled into their driveway. But none of it worked. The system was designed with one main inflow, mine. Without my pump, their lines were useless, their fancy homes reduced to dry shells, their manicured lawns turning to dust. I sat on my porch, the binoculars resting on the railing, and watched the chaos unfold, the sun climbing higher in the sky, its heat relentless. I hadn't even touched the backup reservoir yet, a hidden ace I'd kept for a day like this, a secret I'd buried deep beneath the oak tree behind my barn, its waters untouched, waiting for the right moment. What would happen when I played that card? Would it break Lisa completely, or would she find a way to fight back, her desperation driving her to new lows? I thought of the families caught in this mess, their lives disrupted by a war they didn't start, and felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the years I'd spent maintaining this system, the nights I'd spent fixing leaks in the rain, the mornings I'd checked the reservoir at dawn, and the guilt faded. This was about more than water. It was about respect, about boundaries, about protecting what was mine. That afternoon, a blue pickup rolled in my driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust as it came to a stop, the engine cutting off with a low rumble. A plumber named Carlos stepped out, his work boots crunching on the gravel, a clipboard in his hand, his face weathered but kind, his eyes crinkling with a wry smile. He tipped his cap, a faded baseball hat with a logo I couldn't quite make out, and approached the porch, his steps slow and deliberate. "Sir, the HOA hired me to reconnect a main line in this area. But based on the markers, this is your property, right?" I nodded, my arms crossed as I leaned against the porch railing, the wood warm from the sun. "That's right, and that pipe's mine. If you touch it without my say-so, I'll have to file trespassing charges." Carlos gave a wry smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners, a knowing look that spoke of years dealing with HOA nonsense. "No problem, sir. I won't touch a thing. I'll just mark it as inaccessible and bill them for the call. Honestly, I've seen worse HOA messes than this." I offered him a soda, the cold can sweating in my hand, the condensation dripping onto the porch as I handed it to him. We sat for a bit, the sun dipping low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the air cooling as the day faded. He told me about a call where an HOA president demanded he remove a non-compliant birdhouse from a tree on private land. "She threatened to sue me," he said, chuckling, the sound low and warm. I told her to take it up with the birds. I laughed, the sound rough but genuine, and for a moment, the weight of the day lifted, the shared humor a small oasis in the storm. But as Carlos drove off, his truck's taillights fading into the dusk, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Lisa wasn't the type to back down. She'd come at me again, and I needed to be ready. I thought of a time early in my marriage when Sarah and I had faced a similar challenge. A neighbor who tried to claim a strip of our land, citing an old, outdated survey. We'd fought it together, spending nights poring over documents, our kitchen table covered in papers, her hands steady in mine as we prepared our case. We'd won, and that night, we'd celebrated with a bottle of cheap wine, her laughter filling the house as we danced in the kitchen. That memory strengthened me now, a reminder of what I was fighting for. Not just water, but the life I'd built, the promises I'd kept. At sunset, I checked my mailbox, the old metal creaking as I opened it, the hinges groaning with age. Inside was a crisp white envelope from the HOA, the Pine Valley logo embossed in the corner, its gold foil catching the fading light. My stomach tightened as I tore it open, the paper crisp under my fingers, revealing a $12,000 fine for unauthorized irrigation access, signed by Lisa herself, her signature a sharp, angular scrawl that seemed to radiate her smugness. The audacity made my jaw clench, my fingers tightening around the paper until it crumpled, the sound a soft rustle in the quiet evening. I didn't rip it up, though. Instead, I sat at my desk, the glow of my lamp casting shadows on the wood, the air heavy with the scent of old books and leather. I drafted a letter to every Pine Valley resident, my pen scratching against the paper, each word a careful step in a larger plan. I explained the water system's history, attached copies of the expired lease, the pages yellowed but clear, and offered to restore access for a fair monthly fee. On one condition, Lisa had to resign. As I wrote, I thought of my father again, his voice echoing in my mind. You don't fight with fists, Tom. You fight with facts. I sealed the letters, my resolve hardening like the oak outside my window. But a flicker of doubt crept in, a shadow that lingered at the edge of my thoughts. What if the residents didn't believe me? What if they saw me as the villain, not Lisa? I thought of the Wilsons, the Thompsons, the Carters, families I'd known for years, people I'd helped without asking for anything in return. Would they trust me, or would Lisa's lies poison them against me? I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand, the steady rhythm of my breathing, a counterpoint to the storm in my chest. I remember a moment, early in my time here, when I'd helped the Thompsons fix a burst pipe in the dead of winter, the ground frozen solid, my fingers numb as I worked. They'd thanked me with a bottle of whiskey, their gratitude genuine, their smiles warm despite the cold. That memory gave me hope, a flicker of light in the darkness, as I prepared to take the next step. The next morning, I delivered the letters before dawn, the air cool and crisp as I walked the sidewalks of Pine Valley, my breath visible in the early light. The stars were still fading, the first light of dawn painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the world's silent save for the crunch of my boots on the pavement. Each envelope was addressed by hand, a quiet act of defiance in the stillness, the paper crinkling softly as I slipped them into mailboxes, the metal cold against my fingers. I didn't gloat, I laid out the facts. I built the system, the lease expired, Lisa cut my pipe, and now they could have water back if she stepped down. I was halfway through feeding the chickens, the clucking a soothing rhythm, the scent of grain and feathers filling the air, when I heard her, Lisa, her voice piercing the morning calm, accusing a neighbor of colluding with me. She waved my letter like it was a weapon, her phone in the other hand as if she could call in the cavalry, her blazer flapping in the breeze as she marched up and down the cul-de-sac. I watched from a distance, my hands dusty with chicken feed, the sun rising behind her, casting her shadow long and jagged across the pavement. For a moment, I wondered what it must be like to be her, always fighting, always clawing for control, never stopping to see the people she was hurting. Did she ever feel the weight of it, the loneliness of her own making, or was she too far gone, too consumed by her need to dominate? I thought of my own life, the quiet peace I'd found in solitude, the way I'd chosen to build rather than destroy, and felt a strange sadness for her. I knew this was a tipping point. Either the residents would rally behind me, or Lisa would find a way to turn them against me, her lies a poison that could seep into their minds. The uncertainty gnawed at me, a quiet fear that lingered beneath my resolve, but I held my ground, waiting to see which way the wind would blow, the morning light growing brighter with each passing minute. By noon, my phone buzzed with voicemails, the screen lighting up with new messages, a steady stream of voices breaking through the silence. A soft-spoken man, Mr. Bennett, thanked me for the clarity, his voice steady but warm, a quiet gratitude that felt like a lifeline. "My wife and I are ready to sign, Tom," he said. "We just want the water back." A woman who'd lived there for 25 years called next, her voice trembling with relief, the sound of her exhaustion palpable through the phone. "I'm done with the HOA's nonsense," she said. "Lisa fined me for my mailbox being too blue. She's gone too far." One by one, the messages poured in until my inbox was full, a chorus of voices tired of Lisa's reign, their words a balm to the doubt that had lingered in my mind. The residents were rallying, their support a quiet tide, turning in my favor, a wave I hadn't expected but welcomed with every fiber of my being. I sat in my office, sipping coffee, the mug warm against my palms, the bitter taste grounding me as I played back the messages one by one. Each voice carried a story, a grievance, a hope for something better, a future free from Lisa's petty rules, her constant fines, her unyielding control. I thought of Sarah again, her smile flashing in my mind, her laughter a distant echo, and wished she could have seen this. Her quiet, stubborn husband finally standing up to the bully next door, the community coming together in a way she'd always believed they could. That afternoon, Lisa called an emergency HOA meeting at the community center, sending out texts and flyers for a critical water update. Her messages a desperate attempt to regain control. I couldn't resist. I cleaned up, put on a flannel shirt, the fabric soft against my skin, the scent of laundry, soap a small comfort, and slipped into the back of the room, the air heavy with the scent of stale coffee and desperation. I wanted to see her squirm, to watch the empire she'd built crumble under the weight of her own actions. Lisa stood at the front, her face glistening with sweat, her eyeliner smudged from stress, her blonde hair a mess, strands sticking to her forehead, her blazer hanging loose on her frame, as if she'd shrunk beneath the pressure. Her hands gripped the podium, her knuckles white, her nails digging into the wood as she launched into a tirade, her voice sharp but shaky, the words tumbling out in a rush. She called my water shut off extortion, accused me of forging documents, her accusations a desperate attempt to shift the blame. "I've consulted lawyers," she insisted, her eyes darting to the crowd, searching for support that wouldn't come, her voice cracking under the strain. "Everything is under control." But the room was restless, whispers rippling through the crowd like a gathering storm, the air thick with tension, the residents' faces a mix of anger and doubt. Then Mr. Chun, a retired surveyor who rarely spoke, stood up, his posture straight despite his age, his glasses glinting in the fluorescent light. "I've reviewed Tom's lease documents," he said, his voice steady as a rock, each word a hammer striking at Lisa's facade. "I checked the county records myself. Everything he wrote is true. The HOA has no rights to his line, and Lisa's actions might be vandalism." The room went silent, the air heavy with the weight of his words, the truth hanging like a guillotine over Lisa's head. Her face drained of color, her clipboard trembling in her hands, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I leaned back in my chair, my heart racing, not from fear, but from the thrill of seeing truth cut through her lies, a victory sweeter than any I'd imagined. What would she do now? Would she crumble, her empire falling around her, or would she lash out, her desperation driving her to new lows? The room held its breath, the tension a living thing. As we waited for her next move, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a countdown. Lisa tried to pivot, Her voice strained as she announced a unity barbecue the next evening to restore community spirit. Her smile forced, her eyes glassy with desperation, the words a hollow promise. "We'll rent a water truck and refill the fountains," she said, her hands shaking as she clutched the podium, her nails leaving faint marks in the wood. It felt like a last-ditch effort, a queen clinging to her crown as the kingdom burned, her desperation palpable in the stifling air of the community center. I didn't stop her, my mind already racing with the next step in my plan. That morning, I turned the pressure gate back on just enough to feed one spigot near the community center, the water trickling through with a faint hiss, the sound a quiet promise of chaos to come. I wanted to see how far she'd dig her own grave, and I had a little surprise waiting in that spigot, a trap I'd set with a grim satisfaction, a final twist to expose her for what she was. That evening, I watched from my fence line as the barbecue unfolded, grills sizzling, the scent of charred burgers drifting on the breeze, chairs scattered across the lawn, residents sipping lukewarm soda because there was no ice, their faces a mix of frustration and resignation. The water truck never arrived, its absence a glaring failure, and the portable toilets, unflushed for days, reeked so badly the food couldn't mask it, the stench wafting across the cul-de-sac like a toxic cloud, the air heavy with the smell of decay. I watched the residents, their voices a low murmur of discontent, and felt a pang of sympathy. They didn't deserve this, the chaos of a war they hadn't started. But Lisa had brought it on them, her arrogance a poison that had seeped into their lives, and I couldn't back down now, not when I was so close to setting things right. Lisa had set up a misting fan to cool the crowd, connected to the lone spigot I'd rigged, her hands trembling as she adjusted the hose, her face lighting up with a fleeting hope. I'd rerouted it through a filter that dispensed sulfur well water, the kind that smells like rotting eggs, a foul reminder of her overreach, a trap I'd set with a grim satisfaction that morning. My heart thudded with anticipation as I watched her flip the switch, the fan whirring to life with a soft hum, her smile faltering as she waited for relief. A fine mist sprayed the crowd, the stench hitting like a wave, a noxious cloud that enveloped the guests in an instant. A woman shrieked, her hands flying to her face, her voice a high-pitched wail that cut through the chaos. A man knocked over a grill, the coals scattering across the grass with a hiss, the flames flaring briefly before dying out. A child burst into tears, his wails piercing the chaos, his small hands rubbing at his eyes as his mother scooped him up, her face a mask of disgust. The fan sputtered out after 40 seconds, the hose hissing with air, the sulfur stench lingering like a bad memory, the air thick with the smell of decay. The party collapsed in chaos, residents fleeing the scene, their voices a cacophony of disgust and disbelief, their footsteps a frantic retreat across the lawn. Lisa stood in the center, soaked, her blazer dripping with foul water, her face a mask of defeat, her blonde hair hanging in wet clumps, her makeup streaking down her cheeks like black tears. For the first time, she had no words, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for a defense that wouldn't come. Residents walked away, muttering, shaking their heads, their footsteps fading into the night, the moonlight casting long shadows across the cul-de-sac. She was finished, and she knew it. I watched her from the fence, the moonlight glinting off the wet pavement, and felt a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. This wasn't the ending I'd wanted, but it was the one she'd chosen, her arrogance her own undoing. Back at the ranch, I didn't celebrate, not yet. I sat on my porch, the weight of the day heavy on my shoulders, the stars twinkling above like a silent audience, their light cold and distant. I thought of Sarah again, her gentle voice telling me to stand firm but fair, her memory a steady anchor in the storm. I'd won this round, but people like Lisa don't surrender quietly, their pride a fire that burns even as it destroys them. She'd try something else. I was sure of it, her desperation a force that would drive her to new lows, her need for control a beast that wouldn't rest. And I hadn't even touched the backup reservoir yet, a hidden ace I'd kept for just such a moment, buried deep beneath the oak tree behind my barn. Its water's a secret I'd guarded for years. What would happen when I played that card? Would it be the final blow, or would she find a way to fight back, her desperation fueling a new plan? The next morning, I saw signs of surrender. For houses posted water jugs on their porches with notes saying they'd sign my agreement, the white plastic glinting in the sunlight. A fifth had a sign in their dead lawn. We want water, not HOA drama. The words scrawled in red marker, a bold declaration of defiance. Lisa's empire was crumbling, one blade of grass at a time. But I knew the battle wasn't over, the tension a quiet hum beneath the surface. I thought of my father again, his words a steady anchor. Patience, Tom. Let the truth do the talking. I took a deep breath, the scent of dew and earth filling my lungs. The morning air cool against my skin, and prepared for the next move, my resolve as unyielding as the land beneath my feet. True to form, Lisa didn't back down, she doubled down. I was sipping my coffee, the mug warm in my hands, when I spotted her through the barn window. She ditched her heels for sneakers, a hoodie pulled low over her face, but that black BMW with the vanity plate, HOA 4 EVR, gave her away. She parked near the fence where she'd cut my pipe, a toolbox in hand, her movements furtive in the early morning light. My pulse quickened as I watched her dig, her movements frantic like a thief in the night. She was trying to reconnect the pipe, not to fix my water, but to steal from it again, to leach pressure without anyone noticing. I wasn't angry anymore. I was almost impressed by her sheer gall, but I wasn't about to let her get away with it. I thought of the years I'd spent maintaining this system, the nights I'd spent fixing leaks in the rain, the mornings I'd checked the reservoir at dawn to make sure it was full. This was my life's work, my family's legacy, and she thought she could take it with a wrench and a desperate plan? I picked up my phone, my fingers steady as I dialed the sheriff's department, my voice calm as I explained the situation. A known individual trespassing on my land, tampering with my infrastructure, with security footage to prove it. They said a deputy would arrive soon, and I hung up, my heart pounding with a quiet resolve. I flipped a switch in the barn, a custom pressure valve I'd installed years ago for emergencies, a little trick my father had taught me after a neighbor once tried to siphon our water during a drought. It didn't release water. It hissed with air and sprayed a burst of bright blue dye mixed with biodegradable foam. Lisa yelped as the valve erupted, the blue foam coating her arms, her tools, her hoodie, the color vivid against the morning light. She stumbled back, dropping her wrench, and scrambled away, looking like she'd been dipped in a blueberry smoothie. I waited in the barn, the scent of hay calming my nerves, the shadows cool against my skin, until the sheriff arrived. 2 deputies stepped out of their cruiser, their boots crunching on the gravel. One, an older man named Deputy Harris, recognized me and tipped his hat. "Morning, Tom. You got footage of her tampering?" I led him to the barn and played the tape. Clear as day, Lisa digging on my land, tools in hand. Harris whistled low. Trespassing, vandalism, utility theft. "We got her." They approached Lisa, who was still wiping blue foam off her arms with a napkin from her purse, her hands shaking. She tried to lie, claiming she was inspecting community pipes, but Harris shut her down. They didn't cuff her, but they escorted her to her car, the neighborhood watching from their windows as she drove off, blue streaks staining her BMW's seats. The news spread like wildfire. Screenshots from my footage hit the neighborhood chat, residents stunned at Lisa's brazen act. A local reporter, Emily, knocked on my door, asking for a statement. I hesitated. I don't do interviews, but she'd already spoken to neighbors who'd signed my agreement. I agreed, on the condition she'd tell the truth. We stood by my reservoir as I explained the system's history, the expired lease, the backup valve. She asked, "Why didn't you fight them sooner?" I looked at the water, its surface glinting in the sun. I wasn't fighting. I just wanted to be left alone. But they came onto my land, cut my pipe, and called it justice. That's not how you treat neighbor. The story aired that night. Rancher reclaims water rights after HOA leader sabotage. Lisa's blue-stained photo went viral. By evening, 25 households had signed my agreement, and I restored their water, valve by valve. But Lisa's house stayed dry. not out of spite, but principle. She hadn't signed the agreement. She thought she controlled everything, but the water was never hers to take. The neighborhood meeting was packed, the community center buzzing with a quiet rebellion. Lisa's house sat dark, her lawn a brittle wasteland, her roses shriveled to sticks. Inside, the residents voted unanimously to remove her from the HOA board. I stood at the back, hands in my pockets, watching years of petty control unravel in minutes. I spoke briefly, my voice steady. I didn't cut your water for revenge. I stopped giving away what's mine. I built this system with my hands, on my land, and all I ever asked was to be left alone. I offered them peace, full water access for a fair fee, no interference on my land, and mutual respect. The applause was soft, grateful, a community breathing freely for the first time in years. As I spoke, I thought of the universal truth at the heart of this fight. Courage isn't loud. It's the quiet resolve to stand for what's right, even when the odds seem stacked against you. That night, I sat on my porch, the stars twinkling above, the soft hiss of sprinklers echoing across Pine Valley. This story isn't just about water. It's about standing up to those who overstep, who think they can control what isn't theirs. Have you ever faced a Lisa in your life? Someone who pushed too far, forcing you to fight for what's yours? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you found your courage. Life in Pine Valley changed after that. The board held real elections. Rules were simplified. People planted flowers they loved, not ones Lisa approved. A little free library popped up near the park, a small sign of a community rediscovering its humanity. And me? I went back to my routine, feeding the animals, fixing fences, watching the reservoir ripple under the moonlight. I'd built that reservoir with my father after a drought nearly took everything we had, a reminder that preparation and resilience can outlast any storm. Behind the barn, I showed Mr. Chun the real source of my water, a deep well I dug after the lease lapsed, tapping into an aquifer that had sustained this land for generations. It wasn't about power. It was about protecting what I'd built, what my family had poured their hearts into. Mr. Chun called it the most peaceful act of resistance he'd ever seen, and we shared a laugh over pie his wife had baked. Lisa's house stayed dark. She moved out quietly, her reputation in tatters, her home unsellable with no water and a viral video of her blue-stained meltdown haunting her online. Every morning, my sprinkler, on a timer, sprayed just shy of her driveway, a quiet reminder of the boundary she'd crossed. I didn't gloat, but I felt a quiet pride in the peace I'd fought for. 3 months later, Pine Valley was alive again. Kids on bikes, laughter in the air, lawns green and thriving. The water flowed, steady and reliable, because I kept my word. Stories like these remind us of the power of resilience, the strength in standing firm, and the beauty of mutual respect. Daily Narrated Stories is here to bring you more tales that inspire, uplift, and spark change. But we need your help to keep going. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and every subscription brings us closer to sharing more life-changing stories. Don't miss out. Subscribe now, hit that bell, and join our community before this moment passes. Let's make sure the truth always finds a way to flow, just like the water in Pine Valley.